I'll take you through how to render out your final image. So you would use a write node. So what you do there, you can attach it to the very bottom of your script to generate a write node quicker. You can hit W on your keyboard, and that's the shortcut for the write node. All right, now we've got our write node front and center. We would need to change a bunch of settings within this to make sure that our rendered image will come out in the correct format, as well as the correct naming convention. In this case, we don't really have a set naming convention that we need to follow, but within the industry, it is pretty common to render out your work following a strict naming and coding convention. And it's actually understandable why they implement naming conventions, because it'll make it easier for you to pass off your work to other departments. All right, so now the first thing we need to do, you see how we've got this little file box here. What we can do is that we can name our file. So for instance, I'll just name it test, and I'll make it as an MOV. You can either render it out as an image or a video file. So in this case, I'm just going to do a video file. Instead of just creating your file name in here, what I tend to do is I like to click on this file folder here, and it'll come out with the file directory window. And then through there, you can select your file path as to where you want to set your render. In this case, I'm just going to leave it here. And then that's what I'll do, type in my file name for that. Once that's set, I can then change the file type. So I can either change it to a MOV, or I can change it into an image sequence, whether it be through EXR, PNG, or JPEG. EXRs is typically the most common file format for compositors and roto paint artists within the industry. They render it out as image sequence. And to generate an image sequence, what you'll need to do is, instead of just, in this case, with a video, you can just do .mov or .mp4. If you want to generate an image as is, you can just do .exr, which is self-explanatory. And when you change it, as you can see here, there's a bunch of write settings that change in accordance to whatever file format you're using. So I'll just demonstrate that again. So if I was to go back to MOV, as you can see here, different options present itself. With an image sequence, you need to add one little thing to your file naming. So what that will be is, for instance, test.hash. The hash will represent the number of frames within your image sequence. If we're only rendering out 20 frames, then we'll do 2 hashes. If we're rendering out, say, like in this case, 227 frames, which is 3 digits, we'll need to do 3 hashes, and then you'll do dot, and then whatever your file format is. That's how you would usually go about rendering out an image sequence. In this case, we'll just stick to our MOV. And then through here, I've already been through the file type, but you can change the different types of codecs. So by default, gives you Apple ProRes. You can also do H.264, which is fairly common. So you can play around with the particular type of codecs that you want. You can obviously change the frames per second. It's 24, so I wouldn't touch it. It's consistent as the raw footage itself is 24. You got a bunch of different codec profiles and color space options, which I typically tend to leave as default. And then you've also got a bunch of advanced tools, which, if you want to play around with the bit rate, you can tweak it. So in this options here, I usually leave that all as default. Another setting here for, your color space. So, whether you want it default, which in this case is Gamma 2.2 linear, sRGB, Rec 709, so on and so forth. I usually try and match this to whatever the image is. In this case, if you were to click on this Stadium MOV, which I showed you before, it gives you the options for it, and the input transform is Gamma 2.2. So in this case, I'm just going to leave that as default as it matches. And now when it comes to, now that we've got all that set in stone, we can then actually render it. So we hit the render button here, and as you can see here, it gives you this little options box. You can either change this frame range from input, global, or custom. Custom is where you can obviously just go here and just say, for instance, if you only wanted to render 50 frames or whatever, you can just type in 1 to 51 or whatever, right?
But typically I like to keep this as input, because if we've set the project settings correctly, which in this case we set it to 1 to 227, then it should match here in the little render preview. And then after that's all set in stone, we hit OK, and there will be a little rendering progress bar that will present itself and will render accordingly. Once our render has been completed, we can view it by importing it through the read node, as I showed you earlier. So a little test mov, and then we can view it, and we'll give it a bit of a play and see how it looks. There you go, nice and pretty, if you ask me. That's our basic merge A over B comp completed.